What if I told you that LeBron's big offseason decision has been 12 years in the making? July 24th, 2026 will go down in history as the day it finally happened. The day a king was crowned in the city of brotherly love.
LeBron James is signing with the Philadelphia 76ers.
Philadelphia's 2026 offseason has been one for the record books. Mike Ganzi has put on a masterclass in not only fleshing out a roster's strengths, but doing so cheaply and effectively. Backup guard depth to help Tyrese Maxey, 3-and-D additions like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Dean Wade to balance out lineups, and the crown jewels of this roster, Jalen Brown and one LeBron James. This is undeniably the best version of the Sixers we've ever seen, but what's been lost in the celebration of a new title contender is the fact that LeBron's arrival has been well over a decade in the making. And in more ways than one, the timeline of the process, LeBron's reign over the East, and his tenure in LA have all been tied together and leading up to this very moment. But in order to understand how this roster came to be and why LeBron's arrival to the Sixers was more or less inevitable, we have to go all the way back to July 11th, 2014. The NBA was a very different place in the mid-2010s. Even though we're used to the Western Conference reign today, the level of competition was at another level. 8 of the league's top 10 records in the 13-14 season were out west, and the San Antonio Spurs had just finished a gentleman's sweep over what was widely believed to be the league's best team in the Miami Heat. Following this loss, LeBron James opted out of his contract and created a media firestorm. The decision we just finished reeling from 4 years ago had started up again, and the biggest question in sports was back. Where was LeBron James going next? Media outlets had every answer in the world. Some rumors had him signing with the Mavericks to build a core of LBJ, Dirk Nowitzki, and Monte Ellis. Others predicted that he'd re-sign with Miami and had opted out simply to send a message that he was frustrated after their finals loss. But in their article on the Kings' second decision, Bleacher Report laid out 3 criteria for signing James that have remained almost perfectly true in the decade plus since the story was published. The first was that it had to be a team with enough money to sign. James's earning potential as a max player was around $20 million in 2014, and there were roughly 6 teams that had enough cap available to make the move. The second criteria was that the team must have the potential to land other quality players. Brown wasn't the only superstar in the market that year, and Carmelo Anthony's free agency positioned him as a potential co-star after they failed to team up on the Knicks 3 years earlier. And the final criteria was that they must have some sort of personal tie to him or be a major market franchise. So on this short list of teams that checked every box, while names like the Lakers or Cavaliers were thrown around, there were whispers of a dark horse, the Philadelphia 76ers. Philly was not a premier team by this point. They had just finished a 19-win season, but where they didn't have talent, they had the potential to acquire. Michael Carter-Williams' Rookie of the Year campaign was headlined by a near triple-double debut against the Heatles. And with roughly $25 million in cap space, along with the major market that is Philadelphia, they had a better chance than it would have looked at a glance. Unfortunately though, timeline-wise, it simply wasn't a match. Philly was still in the early stages of the process, and while a LeBron signing certainly would have shifted the landscape of the East, they were a little over 3 months removed from an NBA record 26 losses in a row, and no amount of PR or front office movement could have convinced LeBron to sign. But the Sixers' underrated position in 2014 would eventually evolve into a legitimate pitch. LeBron would of course make his decision to return home to Cleveland to a roster that was tailor-made for his game. They had just wrapped up a 33-win season and had barely missed the playoffs, and third-year guard Kyrie Irving was a bona fide star in the league.
Somebody off. Face of the franchise, Kyrie Irving.
And in the weeks after LeBron announced his return, the Cavs orchestrated a 3-team trade that brought one of the league's best power forwards, Kevin Love, to Cleveland and formed the prototypical LeBron core, a dominant guard and paint player with 3-point shooting and defense surrounding them. The Cavaliers were an immediate force, winning 53 games that next year and marching to their second ever NBA Finals appearance where they lost to the Warriors that season before bouncing back in 2016 to capture their first ever franchise title and birth the LeBron James stimulus package. Following the Cavaliers' finals victory, the Sixers made their first big move in the process era, drafting Ben Simmons with the first overall pick, the 6'10" point guard out of LSU who was touted by many as the next LeBron.
Simmons out of Philadelphia, the #1 player taken overall. He does pretty much everything on the basketball court.
Simmons, like Embiid 3 years earlier, would miss the entirety of his rookie season with injury, and as Embiid's 31-game masterclass nearly won him the 2016 Rookie of the Year award, 2017 set the stage for a big year for Philly, and the Sixers bounced back in a big way. winning 52 games and securing the 3rd seed in the East behind an emerging superstar duo. Embiid's sophomore campaign saw him make his first All-Star game, as well as second-team selections to the All-Defensive and All-NBA teams. And Simmons was devastating at the guard position, guarding 1 through 5 while looking genuinely unstoppable in the open floor.
Simmons in the open floor, on the way, and he slides for 2!
And bringing a mixture of size and passing vision to the guard position that had rarely been seen. Simmons' dominance put the league on notice that Philly was here as a legit threat in the East, and after the Pacers handed LeBron his first ever Game 1 loss in the first round, Colin Cowherd delivered a now infamous quote about what Ben Simmons in the league could mean for LeBron.
But I had an epiphany Saturday morning, and I've thought about it for 2 nights, 3 days. Hey, LeBron, Ben Simmons is here. We're all good.
In some people's eyes, the Sixers process hadn't just caught up to the Cavs, it surpassed them. And the same team that had once been viewed as a dark horse to capture the NBA's most sought-after free agent had just finished with a better regular season record than him. But then, James set the NBA world on fire again.
Breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. LeBron James will not pick up the option on the final year of his contract with the Cavaliers and will become an unrestricted free agent today.
On June 29th, 2018, just before the deadline, he opted out of the final year of his contract to become a free agent and begin another round of the LeBron James sweepstakes. And once again, there were dozens of teams in the hypothetical running, as this decision was not unexpected by LeBron, and scenarios like a return to Cleveland under a different contract or a departure to LA had all been floated around. But this time, the Sixers were legitimately in the running, and in many ways, they were actually the best option available to James. They checked off every box on Bleacher Report's criteria. They were working with roughly $30 million in cap, and if they waived a couple of non-guaranteed contracts, they could have easily fit a max for LeBron into their books. Philly had also seen a resurgence as a big market team since they'd started winning games. In that year, they actually ranked 3rd in average attendance, just behind the Cavaliers and Bulls, and would have been able to offer James the star-studded big market experience he'd been searching for. And basketball-wise, they were a match made in heaven. Simmons and LeBron had a well-documented off-the-court relationship, and his two-way play at the guard spot would have blended perfectly with James's game at that point. Layer onto that the rapidly improving Joel Embiid, a mix of three-point shooting and defense they had coming off the bench, and Philly was no longer a dark horse in the James sweepstakes. They were a favorite, and even had a meeting with Rich Paul ahead of James's eventual decision. But instead, he chose the Lakers. Still reeling from the Kobe Bryant era, they had only managed to win 35 games this season, floundering in a stacked Western Conference and having a plethora of young talent, but nobody near ready enough to help the Lakers contend immediately. And in a strange reversal of the decision he'd made in 2014, the now stacked, readily contending Sixers were being passed up for a franchise in the midst of a rebuild. This decision aged extremely poorly in the immediate season. James's Lakers flopped in the West, only winning 2 more games and finishing as the 10th seed, while the Sixers restructured big time, landing Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris through mid-season trades and looking like a championship favorite before losing on a heartbreaker by the North.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
Despite both team seasons ending in failure, they each had markedly different off-seasons that year. Philly focused on recommitting to their core by re-signing Simmons and Tobias Harris while bringing in Josh Richardson and Al Horford to create a dominant defensive unit. But the Lakers, for their part, completely overhauled their roster, and on July 7th, they signed Danny Green and Avery Bradley to add more defense and shooting to their roster, along with re-signing KCP and Alex Caruso, along with trading for Anthony Davis to seemingly overnight construct the contender LeBron had always searched for. This core would immediately deliver LeBron his 4th title, with the James Davis two-man game and LA's center and perimeter depth proving to be too much to handle, and the league braced for what looked to be another James dynasty in LA. Unfortunately, in the years that followed this lone championship, the Lakers would repeatedly fail to build a unit around LeBron that had the same blend of defensive tenacity, shooting ability, athleticism, and skilled center play that these 2020 Lakers had. And on the other side of the league, the Sixers were watching Embiid blossom into something nearly unheard of. The 2021 season in LA was by all accounts a massive failure. Free agency and trades gutted most of their championship rotational pieces, and a midseason ankle injury to LeBron essentially doomed their repeat hopes in the first round by the Suns. And while Joel Embiid put together a borderline MVP level season this year, their postseason flameout against the Hawks lives in infamy for NBA fans, as Ben Simmons' shooting concerns had blossomed into a full-on phobia, which culminated in him passing up a dunk over Trae Young late in Game 7 of the semis.
The game is in your head. That's a dunk for Ben Simmons right there. You got it.
And spelling the end of his time in Philly. 2022 was a year of big moves and disappointment for both parties. Embiid put together another borderline MVP-level season and led the league in scoring. However, with Simmons refusing to play for Philly, a midseason trade to bring James Harden to the Sixers renewed their title aspirations. Over in LA, they took a big swing to acquire Russell Westbrook and form a big three that on paper provided the elite guard that LA had been missing since their championship run. But a mix of injuries, lack of basketball chemistry, and old age meant this Lakers roster was little more than a mix of names with no real hopes of contention, and they missed the playoffs entirely. And back in Philly, even though his postseason regression and a hobbled Joel Embiid led to a 6-game exit against the Heat, with Harden on the roster and an emerging Tyrese Maxey who led Philadelphia in scoring that series, hopes were higher than they'd been, especially in the guard room. So the following season, it looked like the pieces had finally fit together in Philly. Joel Embiid was an unstoppable force. 33.1 points a game on 54.8% shooting was enough to secure the MVP he'd been chasing for 2 seasons. And he was flanked by the NBA's assist leader this season in James Harden and Tyrese Maxey, who'd become a legitimate star, averaging 20.3 points on elite efficiency. It looked like this was the most talented core Embiid had played with since the Butler and Simmons days, and after the Nets dissolved their Irving-Durant duo at the deadline, this was the best shot they'd had at the finals in years. Unfortunately, it's never that easy, and even though it was a hard-fought series between the two, Jason Tatum's record 51 points in Game 7 of the semis ran Philly out of the gym.
51 for Jason Tatum in Game 7.
And embarrassingly into yet another early offseason. The Lakers had had a much more successful postseason, managing to take a season that started with a 2-10 record and turned it into a Western Conference Finals run behind a mid-season roster overhaul that brought D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, Malik Beasley, and Jared Vanderbilt to LA to build a surprisingly dominant team that ultimately couldn't figure out the Denver Nuggets. By this point, James, the Lakers, and the Sixers were all at the same spot. They'd each been able to find a level of consistent success with their respective cores, but they also had clear flaws that capped their ceilings. Philadelphia simply wouldn't be able to contend with Harden's postseason regressions at the lead guard spot, and the Denver Nuggets had exposed that the Lakers roster as a whole still lacked enough depth and defensive continuity to win the West. And in 2024, these issues compounded. Harden's public dissatisfaction with Daryl Morey led to him requesting a trade in the 2023 offseason that eventually sent him to the Clippers. And a mid-season meniscus tear to Embiid gave Maxey the runway to be the true #1 option for the first time. He thrived in this role, averaging 25.9 points and 6.2 assists, making his first All-Star game and winning the Most Improved Player award. And even though they lost in 6 games, Maxey and Embiid's combined 62.8 points per game against the Knicks in the opening round of the playoffs positioned him as the reliable guard co-star the Sixers had been searching for. And in Los Angeles, as LeBron and AD were leading the charge, whispers about third-year guard Austin Reeves' viability as a starter became louder and louder. And after D'Angelo Russell proved to be virtually unplayable yet again in their first-round loss to the Nuggets, he and head coach Darvin Ham were on the chopping block in Tinseltown. So as a result, the 2024-25 season was a year of hometown growth. After the Sixers signed Paul George that offseason, early injuries to him and Embiid's declining health meant Maxey was again left to lead a depleted Sixers team. And Austin Reeves stepped into a bigger role as the perfect guard complement to LeBron and AD early on in the season. But then, things dramatically changed on February 2nd, 2025.
Breaking news on SportsCenter this morning, the Lakers and Mavericks making it a blockbuster night. Luka Doncic headed to the Lakers, Anthony Davis headed to the Mavericks in a seismic trade.
The Los Angeles Lakers struck a trade to bring Luka Doncic to LA in exchange for LeBron's longest tenured teammate, Anthony Davis. The move sent shockwaves through the league immediately, with people questioning if it was real or if Shams had been hacked. But as the reality set in that Dallas had actually gone through with the move, it became clear that LA had definitively found their star for the future, and James's spot as the franchise's centerpiece had officially been taken. LA ultimately wouldn't have enough time to mesh, and they'd lose in the first round to the Timberwolves, retooling in the offseason by adding players like DeAndre Ayton and Jake LaRavia to the roster. But these moves, along with Reeves' breakout season, were not necessarily just meant to lighten James's offensive burden. They were confirmation that LA had a new golden boy. And with LeBron already missing time with sciatica as the league's oldest player, he watched as his leverage with the team he'd restored to glory slipped away in real time. And as James stared down another summer of free agency, the landscape of the league began to key in on the situation in LA. with James making it official when he informed the Lakers that he wouldn't be suiting up for them this upcoming season.
You're reporting that after 8 years, LeBron James, the NBA's all-time leading scorer, will be playing a record 24th season in the NBA, but it will not be with the Los Angeles Lakers.
After 8 long years, the biggest story in sports had reared its head again. In this time, Philadelphia was no longer on the outside looking in. Their 2025-26 season saw Tyrese Maxey take yet another leap to become a 30-point-per-game scorer and one of the most devastating offensive weapons in the league. And super rookie VJ Edgecombe's open floor presence helped ease the offensive load on Joel Embiid and act as a silver lining from a season that ultimately ended in a second-round sweep. And in the weeks leading up to LeBron's decision, newly appointed president of basketball operations Mike Ganzi put on a clinic, flipping Paul George into finals MVP Jalen Brown fresh off the best statistical season of his career. And he followed this blockbuster with signings like Anthony Simons, Dean Wade, and the drafting of LeBron Philon to make Philly an increasingly attractive destination for LeBron. Philly checked nearly every box on Bleacher Report's sacred criteria. They remained a big market team that had already managed to acquire big name talents to pair with James. And Maxey's status as a clutch sports signee, as well as Ganzi's long-term relationship with LeBron, meant they'd had a lot more pulling in their direction than it would have appeared at a glance. So once LeBron unofficially announced that his move would be based purely on happiness and not monetary value, the door was wide open for Philly to finally get their king, which they did on July 24th. Since James' signing, the fanfare, expectations, and hype surrounding the Sixers has only intensified, with people wondering how good they could be and what the offensive hierarchy will look like. But along with the anticipation for what's to come, whispers from content creators and analysts alike have continually questioned how James could have made such a decision. How joining a fourth, seemingly unconnected franchise will affect the 41-year-old's legacy, and what, if any, shot this franchise has ever had at being LeBron's final destination. But like we've seen, they've been there all along. Through every free agency whirlwind, building parallel rosters that have all in some way, shape, or form given them a better and better shot at landing LeBron. And as presently constructed, this is a Sixers team that has provided LeBron with a roster that in many ways is the culmination of everything he's looked for at each career stop. Legitimate dominance at the center position, high-scoring offensive guard production, and 3-and-D options that allow him the space to pick apart opposing defenses. Bad teams, bad coaching, bad runs, bad chemistry, bad luck. Misfortune has been the common denominator between LeBron and the Sixers. But now they've come together to create what on paper looks like the most complete team in the NBA currently. But as they've seen time and time again, the game isn't played on paper. And with the type of luck these two have had, the only guarantee for them is that nothing's guaranteed. And each win this year will have to be earned if they hope to complete their championship hunt. Philly has had no shortage of star power since the process began all the way back in 2014. So far, none of it's been enough to break their 42-year championship drought. LeBron's played with plenty of stars as well, and he's brought a title to every team he's been on. Something has to give. But what do you think? Are these Sixers a legit favorite in the East, or will they become just another drop in the ocean of what-ifs that we've seen in the city of brotherly love?